Hey everybody, I'm Alex Cohen.
And I'm Sarah Sadwani.
And welcome to the latest edition of the Inside the Issues podcast. So much ground to cover once again. Starting off with the big talker of the week, the sentencing of former county supervisor, former city council member Mark Ridley Thomas.
That is right. And out of Sacramento, there's a sex trafficking bill that's causing quite a kerfuffle with all sorts of LA implications.
Yes, indeed. And we talked last week about the GOP debate. There's another debate potentially on the horizon involving a California governor. You know, will it happen or won't it? We will dive into that. But let's start off, Sarah, talking about the sentencing of Mark Ridley Thomas. I think anyone watching this podcast or listening probably remembers the premise here, but there was the big federal corruption probe, his involvement with USC, making some kind of, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, all having to do with his son, Sebastian Ridley Thomas, who was facing sexual harassment allegations in Sacramento in the legislature. So he left, needed what they call a soft landing. Mark Ridley Thomas kind of helped provide that for him at USC's School of Social Work. They got busted. Lots of emails, including emojis. Everyone waiting to see what would happen. Right. Then sentencing gets delayed because of a hurricane turned tropical storm. And then it comes down 3.5 years.
3.5 years, with the judge specifically saying, we want to make an example out of you. We see too much corruption in local politics, and we need to make an example out of you, Mark Ridley Thomas. Yeah. I thought fascinating stuff. Mark Ridley Thomas really digging in his heels in a statement before the court at his sentencing. Before that, really hadn't made any statements. Really saying, I still don't think that what I did was illegal. It may have been inadvisable, but it wasn't illegal. And I'm so curious to hear your thoughts about this, Alex, because for me, I was like, you were convicted by a jury of your peers. My understanding from a lot that has been written about that trial is many of their jurors had no idea who Mark Ridley Thomas even was, let alone even knowing about this scandal. So really coming in, open-minded and not really knowing, convicting him on about half of the charges, not all of them. Yeah. And so I was really kind of puzzled by this, like, is there ever any acceptance of any wrongdoing ever? Like, I wouldn't allow my kids to get away with that.
Yeah, well, gosh, there's so many directions we could go. And like Marilyn Flynn, who pled guilty, got a lighter sentence. She was able to do at-home time, probation. But he did not. And we saw the differences there. I want to go straight to the segment that we do here every week. We call it, What's the Word? The word this week, Sarah? Exception, right? Because, everybody except me, right? Is there, I think what you're saying, like Mark Ridley Thomas was kind of asking in some ways for an exception, right? On paper, it might have looked like this, but I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. What the judge said, and I kind of say, I feel exactly what he was saying here. Mark Ridley Thomas actually got a degree from USC himself in ethics. So, if you get a degree in ethics, I don't know that you can quite as plausibly make that claim that I didn't see. And some of those emoticons and the winking and the whatnot kind of imply that, you did know what you were doing in that particular instance.
Specifically asking to keep this silent and don't say that in an email. Yeah. Don't say that in an email.
Well, first of all, I think in this day and age, and maybe it's a generational thing, I don't know. I feel like there's a reason why my kid is on Snapchat all the time. The messages disappear. I think that there's a real generational difference where a lot of people in the past, and of Mark Ridley Thomas's age and Marilyn Flynn's age, was like, this is my email. No one's ever going to see it. Like, these are my text messages. No one's ever... Do it as if, and I say this to my kids, if you're sending an email, pretend the world can see it. Are you okay with what you wrote there?
Exactly. And let's be quite frank, right? Like, this is city politics. We've already had 2 other city council members go down in corruption scandals. FBI has its eye on city politics. and on USC, because this isn't the first time that the FBI has shown up at USC either, right?
Yes.
So
University of Scandal and Corruption.
Exactly. So smarten up here, folks, about the emails.
You and I have already both mentioned our children, which brings up the point. We've talked about this before, and I will say it again. This wasn't as if Mark Ridley Thomas was engaging in these propositions, situations, agreements, negotiations, whatever, to get rich. It was for his son who had landed in trouble. And show me the parent who doesn't see their kid in trouble and has that feeling of desperation of what do I do to help him out. So I think about that a lot.
Is it just about helping his son, though, or is it also about helping the brand? Right?
Ridley Thomas, not a bad point.
The Ridley Thomas brand was growing strong. He has his next generation already serving in office. There's some helping yourself out there with that too.
And
but
this is when he was on the County Board of Supervisors, knowing my time here will only be a certain time. Knowing, I mean, I don't know if he had in mind at that moment that he would run for city council, but that's exactly what he did, right? And so you've got to have your reputation around that.
Well, and when he ran for city council, he made it quite clear that he was running for city council because he planned to run for mayor. Yeah, that was there were a couple articles written about it at the time. Everyone was kind of looking at Mark Ridley Thomas as like, ooh, this is going to be this could be our next mayor of Los Angeles.
Yeah. And I think that there was, I have literally, as you said, that a flashback to being at First AME Church with USC's Jody Armour. The two of us moderated a debate with Mark Ridley Thomas and Grace Yu, Ora Vasquez, Channing Martinez, the other candidates for CD10. And what really came off to me was Mark Ridley Thomas was acting. It was almost like, I mean, there are a couple parallels here, and we can talk about this in a moment because I know you got some clapbacks on Twitter. There were certain parallels with Donald Trump in that I think if Mark Ridley Thomas felt like he had the option of just not being at that debate because he knew he had such a lead, he wouldn't have. And he sat there almost kind of like, what am I doing on the stage with this? Like, this is my job. Like, give it to me. To a certain extent, like almost he was the exception from the other candidates. You made a notice of the above the law.
Well, yeah, I put out a tweet the other day, as I tend to do, about, there's so much love for Mark Ridley Thomas. There's so many folks still, although actually after the sentencing, it's actually been crickets from the mayor and others. But after the conviction, we heard all this support for Mark Ridley Thomas. And, and this comment that he made about it, well, it's inadvisable. I'm like, no, bro, you have been convicted in a court of law. And I just put a tweet out about, like, what if Donald Trump made these kinds of comments? He essentially is making these. This is not illegal. I'm above the law.
Right.
I don't deserve this. This is a witch hunt after me. People didn't like that too much. Well, only one or two people, but some people loved it. But
and I think it's because of all of the past service, right? And I think there's a certain time question here, is that how much in this present moment, this particular sentence and the 3.5 years that he'll serve, people are comparing that and this very pivotal mistake that he made, and comparing that though with the metro stations that he opened and days of dialogue that he started, and
saving
so
MLK
much.
Hospital,
a huge one.
Huge.
So there's a couple interesting sidebars to this story. One of them was, and in case you missed it, story. Bernard Parks, former LA chief of police, former city council member who ran against Mark Ridley Thomas in 2008, has been one of the few black voices in the city of LA politics to say, send him to the slammer. And he did just that. He sent a letter to the judge overseeing the case. And basically, he used, I guess it was like an honorary badge that the police department gave him upon retirement. And he used it like as his letterhead, which, I mean, I can understand how you would do that, right? Like, I'm not just some guy. I'm Bernard Parks, in case you forgot who I am. But now there's an ethics commission complaint filed against Mark Ridley.
Against Bernard Parks.
Against Bernard Parks for this letter that he wrote about Mark Ridley Thomas. And it's like, at a certain point, it's like, guys, just everybody.
Yeah, saying that he can't use the badge, right? He cannot put that on his letterhead.
Which he probably couldn't. I mean, and he's making a lot of the same arguments like Mark Ridley Thomas. I didn't know. I'm just using this. So it becomes very meta.
It sure does. It sure does.
And then the other thing that I'm just so curious, because I've heard a lot of people talking about what Mark Ridley Thomas has done in the past and about this present moment. I have not heard a lot of talk about the future of Mark Ridley Thomas. And, he's not a spring chicken, but he still had plenty left in him, as you mentioned, like wanted to run for mayor, that was his trajectory. So I'm trying to picture, okay, he goes and does his time. first of all, what is it like to be, I mean, is this the, to be a former county supervisor and council member? There's like Mitch Englander, there's other Jose Huizar, there's other folks doing time. But when he comes
to be this
out,
kind of icon,
that icon, it's just, it feels different.
It does.
When he comes out, what does he do? Like, I'm really, and like, folks, if you've got thoughts, ideas on this, like, please let us know at us, right? But I wondered if there's a world where he comes out and becomes, it's like, look, I don't even know, once you've been convicted and sent to prison, there's probably rules about what office you can run for. But maybe he comes out and says, like, now I'm going to spend the rest of my days working on prison reform.
Yeah.
Because that's something that needs a lot of
100%,
work. And what better, right? And he could call all those old contacts and say, like, now I've got the lived experience. I just thought that could be, I don't know if that's how the script plays out. What do you think? Does he have a third act?
I mean, possibly, right? I mean, you see a lot of folks after, well, I don't know that we see a lot of folks, but in general, when there's a third act, doing work still in service of their communities, some running some sort of nonprofit. Of course, Mark Ridley Thomas as well was very much a part of the development of the Empowerment Congress, which was a huge leadership development organization in South LA, leading to the development of the neighborhood councils. I mean, he really has done so much. So I think I hope to see a future where he's doing something positive in the future.
And maybe a theme we've talked about so many, like, politicians are people, folks, right? And like, show me the person who is all good or all bad.
They don't exist.
They're unicorns, right?
We're all crazy folks at the end of the day.
That is true. Well, we should probably move on to another legal prison criminal justice type story. And that is around a piece of legislation known as SB 14. It was introduced by State Senator Shannon Grove, a Republican from Bakersfield. And basically, this would impose harsher penalties. If you're convicted of human trafficking of a minor for sex, it's on the list of serious felonies, which could get you, California's infamous third strike. And kind of on paper, I think to a lot of people, a no-brainer, right? Like, there's a lot of trafficking in this
Child sex trafficking, bad.
Right?
Bad.
Right. Like, there's very few exceptions.
Yes, exactly.
To that.
That's
and yet, if there's an exception to be found, go
Here
to Sacramento,
there it
they
is.
will find it. So basically, there were a number of members of the legislature who raised some concerns about this.
And I think notably, it had sailed through the Senate and then made its way over to the Assembly as, how a bill becomes a law. That's how it happens. And the Assembly Public Safety Committee kills this bill, right? The Democrats on this bill all vote against it at the committee level, essentially killing the bill.
And let's talk about why for just a moment. And in fact, to illustrate a case in point, we'll show a little bit of this is what happened during some of the hearings on this. There were people, of course, who had been trafficked themselves who said, yes, SB 14 all the way, long overdue, some very powerful emotional testimony. But at least one woman by the name of April Grayson, she's with the group Sister Warriors Freedom Coalition. And she talked about what it was like. She was convicted of trafficking at age 19. And this was because of a situation that she was put in by her trafficker. And she talked about how awful it was for her that she was found guilty of a crime when, in fact, she was the victim of a crime. Let's take a look at what she had to say.
I have to remind the authors in this committee that this bill, I'm so sorry, will actively harm many survivors of human trafficking, especially the Black, brown, Native, poor, LGBTQ women and trans survivors who are already least likely to see justice.
So you had all these Democrats who basically killed the bill, and then...
And then the pile-on occurred, right?
Wow.
Oh my gosh. It like blew up on social media. The governor gets involved. Gavin Newsom calls Shannon Grove saying, I got your back on this one.
Which does not happen all that often,
you don't hear that. No,
Republicans.
exactly. The new Assembly Speaker, Robert Rivas, also offered support to this Republican-led bill, saying, no, we need to move this forward. And really just a huge backlash against the members of this Assembly committee that had killed this bill, with some notable folks on this committee.
Drop some names.
Reggie Jones Sawyer running for city council here in Los Angeles for that Mark Ridley Thomas seat that is currently occupied by Heather Hutt, but has already declared that he is going to run. Miguel Santiago, who is going to challenge Kevin De Leon. All of them kind of piled on, and the backlash was serious.
And Isaac Bryan, an assembly member,
and Isaac
not
Bryan,
necessarily, at least as far as I know, Isaac, forgive me, but I don't think you've declared that you're running for anything in particular.
He's part of the leadership now.
But yes, and he's just been such an up-and-comer, and in no small part because of his real devotion and passion about, criminal justice reform and making sure that no one gets caught up in the system in a way that they shouldn't.
And to that point, right? I mean, this essentially does make felons out of people and would have them fall under the 3 strikes rule. And I mean, I think we've had propositions about this. We recognize that was a piece of legislation supported by the voters back in the 90s that has had horrible consequences, right? So many people winding up in prison for life.
Yes.
And so, of course, there is this eye towards, is this really fair? Is this just?
And are there people who would be the exception to this that we got to look out for? Now, just this week, Shannon Grove held a media briefing where she was asked about, because it looks like now she's like, it looked like this thing was going to die, and now it's back in action. Thank you, Governor Gavin Newsom. And she said right now it's with the Assembly Appropriations Committee. She says she's got the votes. And people asked her, well, what about this situation where maybe people who are traffickers, but only because they were trafficked into that position? What about them? Let's listen to her response.
This is a victim-centered bill. And if by any chance that a trafficking victim is forced into a recruiting setting in a trafficking situation, then there's current law in the books that allow for affirmative defense. And I have to remind you that when we introduced this piece of legislation, we went to the experts. And one of the experts that we used was the former Alameda County District Attorney, Nancy O'Malley, who started the first HEAT unit, a victim-centered human trafficking unit in the entire nation. It was one of the first in the nation. They've prosecuted over 850 cases of human trafficking in the state of California, and there was only one situation where they brought charges against a victim or a person that was trafficked before. And within just a few months, they removed those charges from that individual, realizing that that individual was formerly trafficked.
So we will keep you posted on that. But I think it's an interesting win, and I think in some ways unexpected. Like, it was looking like a loss for the Republicans, but then it became an even bigger win because they actually had Newsom siding with them on something and kind of puts them in the spotlight. I think for those more progressive folks like Reggie Jones Sawyer, I'm dying to know for them, like, what's the takeaway from this in terms of your priorities and your politics and where you make exceptions for things.
Absolutely. And I will be very curious to see if this is an issue that continues to come up as particularly those two, Reggie Jones Sawyer and Miguel Santiago, as they are campaigning down here for city council, they switched their votes, right? So does that come back to haunt them, being flip-floppers on this issue, that you took this one stance and now suddenly with some pressure you caved and now you have a different perspective? I'm curious to see how that's going to play out for them on the campaign trail in particular.
Now, speaking of flip-flops, in case you missed it, folks, I talked about it here a while back. Gavin Newsom sat down, did an interview a couple weeks back with Fox News' Sean Hannity. Again, if you haven't seen it, just watch it. It's that good. But one of the things that they talked about was, would you debate with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis? Because Newsom and DeSantis have been at each other for so long. And you could see Newsom's eyes. It was, bring it on. And
bring me the national spotlight,
please. Right. I just want to be. And honestly, I would say that Governor Gavin Newsom, not even because he wants to be president someday, I think he just really wants to debate the guy. I think he's one of those genuine people who enjoys that sport, because it is a sport of debate.
Absolutely.
So then they brought it to DeSantis, and they're like, he's saying he will. Will you show up? It kind of reminds me of the kids at the high school. It's like, Billy said he'll fight you after seventh period. Are you going to come back in the gym?
Right. Meet me behind the gym.
So they're both like, it's on. They had floated November 8th and November 10th, I believe, as possible dates, and doing it in a battleground state like Nevada or North Carolina, which I just think would be so fascinating. But now it looks like there might be a bit of a hitch, because some news outlets are reporting, I think NBC News was the first to break the story, that there are folks within the current administration, Kamala Harris, they're like, excuse me, there is a presidential contest on right now, and y'all are doing this? It's kind of, again, back to high school. It's prom night. Are you really going to mess it up by getting everyone suspended?
Right.
And that is a tricky situation to be in.
It sure is, right? Because Gavin Newsom has come out as a part of the Biden campaign. He says he's 100% Biden. you're kind of stealing his thunder by taking on this debate to some
Or are
extent.
you? Or is there an exception where
exception?
Newsom could come on and say, like my good buddy Joe Biden is doing, and maybe that winds up helping him. I mean, look, again, it goes back to what we were talking about last week. You and I grew up in a world where things went a certain way.
Yes.
And you had the debates, and the candidates showed up, and it was about policy and issues, but that's gone, right? So maybe in this new wackadoodle world, a debate that doesn't actually feature the Democratic candidate, but they are talking about 2024. Who knows? Maybe it's the exception. Maybe it works.
It really could be. It could be. And you know, we've talked about this before, that Gavin Newsom gets to kind of play that punching bag, right? Like he gets to be the tough guy in the corner that's taking punches for the Biden team, so that Biden gets to say, like, oh, we're supporting unity and we want to bring the country together, and then, you know.
Well, and
Newsom gets to play this.
I don't think he'll even be a punching
role.
bag in that, like, looking at DeSantis. Like, I don't think debate is DeSantis' strong suit.
No,
right?
no,
He's very
no.
stiff and like people were making the memes of like when he would say something and then smile, and everyone's like, "Whoa, what's going on there?"
Yeah.
Always looking, everybody, are you guys raising your hands for this? Yeah. So I think because of all of those things, you know, I think Newsom could really go after him in a way that espouses the Democratic ideals, Joe Biden's ideals. Man, oh man. If it does happen, I will pay for my own ticket. I will be there, popcorn in hand.
I love it.
Yes.
I love it.
And one more item, it is a lot less fun to talk about, but it's important to talk about. Absolutely. And that is Cindy Montañez, who has really been a political force here in Los Angeles for many years in the San Fernando Valley, served on their city council, served in the Assembly.
I think their youngest mayor.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the city of San Fernando.
Yes. And I was the current position as CEO of Tree People. That's my former, it's the first time I ever went to summer camp as like a 5-year-old kid. It's the first time I was ever in a play. It's a place that's like, first of all, it's near and dear to me, but it's also a beautiful place that really embodies that, like, LA is this big city, but we care about the environment. And Cindy Montañez certainly does. She was recently diagnosed with terminal cancer. And what's been so amazing is that there's been this real outpouring of love, much like what we saw with Gloria Molina before she passed. And the spirit here, as I believe Monica Rodriguez in the city council said when she was honored there, is like, let's thank this woman and express our gratitude and honor this woman while she's still here. Because, you know, if you only do it after someone is gone, what good is that?
Yeah, no, exactly. It was really beautiful. And as you mentioned, both at the Assembly on Monday and the City Council on Tuesday, just beautiful tributes. She was there with her family. Many of her colleagues from Tree People and other places were there in council to support her and to be with her. And I don't know if you recall this, and fans of the pod might remember when you were out at one point, my good friend, Professor Mike Mendez, came in. He had once worked for Cindy Montañez and continues to be very close with her. So I know that this has been really, really special and important to folks that have been close with her, just in a towering career as well. And she's only 49 years old, you know, but really kind of coming to this work, you know, I don't know what her first act was, but certainly getting a lot of fanfare as a UCLA student, having a hunger strike to form a Chicano Studies program at UCLA, which of course ultimately was successful, and then moving into this incredible career in politics, a pretty nasty election against Nury Martinez as well for city council.
And Alex Padilla, I believe she was up against at one point as well.
Exactly.
What stood out to me is that just given the proximity to the passing of Gloria Molina and the extraordinary career that she had, and we've seen now like Central Park and all these places named after Gloria Molina, I think it's just, you know, 2023 in some ways has been a moment to really take note of the significant impact. You know, if in many ways 2022, and especially the end of it with the leaked racist recording and Nury Martinez was kind of like not the best moment for Latinos in politics and Latinas in politics. I feel like 2023 is reminding us of really the incredible political contribution that so many Latinas have made and will continue to make. And her being honored at City Council, where now you have Imelda Padilla, Eunices Hernandez, and Monica Rodriguez all on the council. Is pretty significant.
It sure is. It sure is. And I think we talked about this a little bit with the passing of Gloria Molina as well. That, you know, for many Latinos, they're unsung heroes. They don't get the recognition that they probably deserved when they were alive. It's upon these moments that we finally stop and realize, oh my gosh, we were taking you for granted in many ways, and you've made all these incredible contributions. They're going to be naming a wash after Cindy Montañez, planting milkweed that will support the growth and development of monarch butterflies, which is often the symbol for undocumented immigrants, which I thought was just absolutely beautiful and brought together both her work for the Latino community, but also on the environment as well. So really a beautiful tribute.
Cindy, thank you for all the work that you've done for our region. Inside the Issues podcast, listeners, viewers, thank you so much for joining us once again. If you haven't yet, check us out on YouTube. If you're just doing the listening thing, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Do let us know what you think Mark Ridley Thomas might do after his time in prison. You can reach me at Alex Cohen in LA.
And I'm at Sarah Sadwani.
And we'll see you here next week. The Inside the Issues podcast is a Spectrum News One production. Crystal Goss is our producer. Nathaniel Leathers is our editor. The executive in charge of production is Jeff Shore.